All right, this meeting's being recorded. Okay, so this talk is about anti-Blackness in our union, our history and our future. It was written by Lila, who's graced us with her presence today, but it's going to be presented by me. Lila wrote basically all the words that I'm about to say. She introduced herself briefly, but Gab is like an PhD student and a former head steward. She's white, she's cis, she, her pronouns. I'm not white, I'm not cis, and I use they, them pronouns. Yeah, I'm the recording secretary at UCSB for UAW 2865. So that's my position. I kind of came into this organizing space at the beginning of the year in 2019. And yeah, I'm relatively new to our union, its history, and I'm learning new things every day. But I guess I'm in a place where I feel comfortable like starting this conversation with what I know and what I've learned from folks who have been here longer than I, and we can open a conversation, I guess. So yeah, I guess if you have anything to add at any point, feel free to like raise your hand or like drop something in the chat, and I'd be happy to make space for you to talk about something if you want to go into more detail or interject or anything. Yeah, I guess I will begin by reaffirming our shared values, and then celebrate some examples of the ways that our local has pushed us to live those values, and finally reflect on some ways I believe we can better live these ideals before turning it over to all of you for questions and for a general discussion. And yeah, I've got a little slide with like further reading and resources and so on. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to a few weeks ago, so I originally gave this, or Lila originally gave this presentation on June 26th. So it's about a month out from when this was a few weeks ago, but I guess it's still a few weeks ago. Our executive board put out a statement on the murder of George Floyd, which concluded as follows, and that's the text on this slide. It says, unionists live by the maxim that an injury to one is an injury to all. To honor this maxim, we must approach this work as accomplices capable of doing the work of anti-racism together, rather than asking people of color alone to explain and educate, and make our union a powerful tool for justice. UAW 2865 joins the call issued by workers at universities and colleges all over the country to cut ties with police departments. We demand that our university defund and demilitarize UCPD and end collaboration with external police departments. We demand that our university prioritize the health, safety, and economic well-being of all its workers and students, and especially those who are people of color. We demand an increase to admissions and programs for retaining Black students at all levels of the institution. Okay, I hope we can all agree on the principles outlined in the statement, as well as the goals of defunding police and prioritizing the needs and the well-being of workers of color, Black workers and Indigenous workers. Our invitation to this monthly membership meeting quoted Bibi, a former head steward, and their reaction to the statement, which is that we can only build an anti-racist union by reflecting on our own practices and history, and that we cannot, in fact, we can't go forward without doing this work. And this desire for accountability is another value that I hope that we all share, not in the spirit of self-flagellation or relitigation, but as a core strategy to win these demands that the e-board lists. Looking back, for example, we see that several of our goals for 2020 are recurring themes from previous organizing efforts. So on the police presence on campus, in our email to membership, we acknowledged BB and the BICC, or the Black Interest Coordinating Committee, their pivotal role in creating a framework for disarmament for our student workers union contract. Because of this work that they did in 2018, we now have a powerful foundation for our defunding and disarming aims going forward. This is also a moment to consider why this language and why this campaign pretty much ended in 2018. So instead of the proposed contract language or anything close to it, UAW 2865's bargaining team settled for a single meet and discuss session with UC admin. And to this date, that session has not happened. And furthermore, regardless of what contract language was eventually accepted, the bargaining team itself deprioritized the issue and didn't spend nearly as much time or effort pushing for these demands as it should have, given that demilitarization ranked fourth on a statewide poll of membership's bargaining issues. So even though it was a really big priority of student workers going into the 2018 contract campaign, this issue was kind of put to the wayside and then kind of dropped altogether. So calling on AFL-CIO to disaffiliate from cop unions. You might recognize this picture as the defaced AFL-CIO headquarters because they are affiliated with the International Union of Police Associations, I think is what IUPA stands for. But yeah, so the BICC drafted and presented a call in 2015 to expel IUPA from AFL-CIO. So reading the statement from the e-board that says that UAW 2865 joins the call issued by workers at universities and colleges all over the country, sort of diminishes the fact that we've already made this call back in 2015. And after the Ferguson uprising in 2014, BICC formed within 2865 to organize and mobilize Black workers. And they, along with accomplices at Davis, drafted and presented the call for AFL-CIO to disaffiliate from cop unions. And we were one of the first locals to do so. And if you check out the chat, Adrian just dropped a link to the statement itself. Yeah, so this action that was taken due to the efforts of the BICC was really groundbreaking in this regard of unions calling on the AFL-CIO to expel police unions. Okay, the Anti-Oppression Committee. So the Anti-Oppression Committee, or the AOC for short, played a major role in pushing for contract language around gender-neutral bathrooms, student worker parents, as well as undocumented student workers during the 2013 to 2014 contract campaign. So we'd like to understand why this committee was defunded, as it was, I believe, one of the only committees that had a funded staff position, and generally how we can better fund and permanently establish a similar initiative in the future. This is like me, Sheila's kind of mini anecdote about the AOC. But when I was in undergrad at Davis, my senior year was the year that I was applying to grad school, and Trump's tax plan that would have taxed graduate students on basically our tuition remission was being considered. And I remember seeing a flyer that a protest that UAW 2865 at Davis was holding. And so I was looking up what the fuck is this UAW union that I was already kind of like familiar with, and came upon the, I guess now archived AOC website. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. Like the Grad Student Workers Union has an anti-oppression committee. Like when I get there, like I want to join up with them. And then it wasn't there when I got here, but it was very like, cool to like baby like union friendly Sheila. Okay. Whoops, I forgot to say a thing on this slide. And also about staffing. So in the e-board statement, though not in the section that I quoted above, we condemn the university around its lack of affirmative action policies, and how there's a California bill going through to reinstate affirmative action. And we ourselves, like UAW, doesn't have affirmative action in our staffing in policy or in practice. And there are accountability steps that are short of affirmative action that we put into our staffing process, but it's unclear how often these steps are being taken, and sort of minimal transparency in staffing decisions to larger membership. So these offer some examples of both steps towards an anti-racist working environment that we've taken, and the long road ahead that we have to acknowledge both the victories and defeats that have slipped from our collective record, such as the 2015 statement to AFL-CIO about policing, which was not on the website at the time that Lila gave this presentation last month, but has since been ported over from the old website. And so this next slide is sort of like not necessarily the focus of this talk, although many other people could probably give a talk focused on this, but this isn't that time and I'm not that person. But generally, there have always been Black rank and file workers having to create independent organizations to address their need, unfortunately in opposition to their bosses, but also in opposition to their own unions. So groups like the Colored National Labor Union, which was the first labor union to accept Black workers because mainstream labor unions weren't, to the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, which is a group within AFL-CIO today for Black trade union members. There's been this history in the labor movement that goes far beyond our own local, that relates to Black folks always having to do the work, and always having to take the lead in the face of union leadership that has not really paid attention to their interests. Oh, I totally skipped over this other part, but I'll say it now. We have a long road ahead, I repeat, to reach the goal in the e-board statement of becoming accomplices capable of doing the work of anti-racism together, rather than asking people of color alone to explain or educate. I guess I'll take another personal aside, is that like in that statement itself, it sort of juxtaposes us, UAW, as the accomplices capable of doing the work, and the people of color being asked alone to explain and educate. So as a person of color, like reading that just like contradiction kind of popped out at me. But myself, many other organizers of color have very little to no confidence in our union to meet our needs, who find the call that they take a more active role in union activities in order for anti-racism to become a priority to be the incorrect order of operations. Our union needs to make anti-racism the priority before we call on student workers who are already marginalized multiple ways by this institution to make us understand what should be already clear to us if we truly believe an injury to one is an injury to all. There's a reason why in larger union history, from the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists to the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and the Black Workers Congress, that non-white rank and file workers have had to create independent organizations that fight their unions and their boss to create an equitable workplace. There is something structurally and rhetorically at work in our organization that it is our responsibility to fix before we can call ourselves accomplices. So I have personally heard so-called identity politics raised derisively in organizing discussions as a way to suggest that anti-racism work is individualistic, performative, and productive, rather than the basis for a collective struggle against the boss and racism in academia, which many of us will continue to experience or be complicit in as we become, or both, as we become professors or academics. Part of why this is also relevant now and not a distraction from some larger issue like the economic crisis and COVID-19 in our universities is something BB has also discussed at length, and I quote them here, that austerity is often a test of a union's commitment. What happens when we have to fight? What happens when we have to fight to stay solvent? What does it mean to have to prioritize existence? It's in these moments that we see performative allyship come to the fore. The wait, let's be strategic, it's not the right time rhetoric blossoms under these conditions. It is a politics which doesn't advocate for marginalization, it simply lets it happen. To put it another way, the orientation of austerity is not to actively harm, but simply not to help. The harm and sometimes death that results from austerity then becomes a part of some larger inexplicable process rather than the outcome of calculated human decisions. So this brings me to my conclusion and something that we will discuss as a group, the question of community and solidarity as we practice them as a union. UAW 2865 asserts on our About page, one of our central organizing goals is to build community and create solidarity. As Audre Lorde writes, without community, there is no liberation. UAW 2865 sees itself as part of a broader movement for justice, understanding that an injury to one is truly an injury to all. This quotation caught my eye in particular because it is from a much larger speech, her famous "The Master's Tools Cannot Dismantle the Master's House" speech. She addressed that speech to what we would now call second-wave feminists. In other words, feminists caught up in the idea that solidarity and unity mean we are all the same and face the same obstacles, in their case, as women. A fuller version of that quotation is as follows. Without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pathetic pretense that these differences do not exist. Those of us who stand outside the circle of the society's definition of acceptable women, those of us who have been forged in the crucibles of difference, those of us who are poor, who are lesbians, who are Black, who are older, know that survival is not an academic skill. It is learning how to take our differences and make them strength. For the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us to temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never enable us to bring about genuine change. And this fact is only threatening to those women who still define as the master's house as their only source of support. I don't pretend to be an expert on Lorde or Black feminism, but when we choose to bring her into this discussion in our value statement, it seems that we are not acting in good faith when our tactics, our histories, and even our definition of words like community and survival minimize our difference in favor of a strategic deployment of unity that can be harmful to our efforts toward a more equitable workplace. As long as we see the union as our only source of support, or academia for that matter, we also play into the glorification of the master's tools that Lorde warns us about. This is the end of my prepared statement. Thank you for letting me take up so much space in this discussion, and we formulated some questions based on the ideas here, and we now open the floor. And on the left of the slide, I want to draw your attention to the statement, this open letter by India Pierce to UAW leadership. And yeah, I guess that's the end of words that I say at length. I'm going to stop the recording here unless there's anything anyone wants to add while the cameras are rolling. Only once. Only twice. So chicken soup with rice. All right, that's all for now. Strike University, folks.